The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover, a novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 57. The Miraculous Healing of the Muslim Apostate Girl. For many days, the semi-slain female author who drafted the controversial books against Islam fought with death, and her soul remained hanging between heaven and earth. During this period, she underwent 2 surgeries on her chest and 1 operation in her brain. She continued to be in the intensive care unit. Her apostate lover Dr. Kamal arrived in Hague 3 days after the failed assassination plot. He wanted to be there on the first day he got the heartbreaking news, but he could not get a booking to fly on the same night. As soon as he arrived at the hospital, he almost lived near the bed of his beloved girlfriend Ibtihal. He prayed day and night for her safety and recovery. He continuously fasted for her. In the meantime, his beloved fiancée remained in the ICU for a couple of weeks. During that time, she continued to be in an extremely critical condition. The bullet that hit her head had done considerable damage to a substantial portion of her brain. Some neurosurgeon doctors expected that if she survives, she may either lose her memory or be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. They expected the damage to affect her memory and spinal cord, hence her nervous system may not work the way it did before, and she may lose her memory forever and becomes like a vegetable who has a life without a brain. Meanwhile, millions of prayers have been offered all over the world for the survival of the female controversial author Ibtihal, who authored books against terrorism and succeeded in legally condemning the terrorist and misogynistic texts of Islam, the Quran and Hadiths, through the ICC in Hague. It has been reported through the media that in many countries, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, and many followers of other religions offered on her behalf prayers and fasted day and night for her recovery. In the capital city of the Netherlands, Amsterdam, a Sudanese pastor who became a member and supporter of the Muslims' liberation movement during Ibtihal's imprisonment in Toronto has fasted for 3 days without food or water for her healing. Dr. Kamal has done the same thing. The days are dragging by like centuries for everybody who is waiting for her healing. In the meantime, the controversial author Dr. Ibtihal, who is loved by millions and hated by over 1 billion Muslims, remained in a comatose state for almost a month. During that time, she went from surgery to surgery until she has been declared by the hospital doctors that she came out of danger, and she is in a stable state. The hospital staff became extremely astonished when the Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal opened her eyes on one morning and recognized her fiancé, who is her Sudanese apostate lover. She could not be able to utter his name, but her faint smile indicated that she recognized him. The Dutch doctors counted it as the first miracle towards her recovery. As the hours and days passed by, her health condition continued to improve until her doctor announced that she has not lost her memory. A few days later, Dr. Ibtihal has been able to talk, and the first name to come out of her lips is the name of her Muslim apostate lover, Dr. Kamal Ahmed. The second miracle happened when the Muslim apostate girl has been able to walk. She began to walk first with the support of Dr. Kamal and a nurse. Her legs are still feeble, and her strength is weak. With the help of a physiotherapist, she is trained gradually to walk by herself. Her response is slow at the beginning. She always needs someone to support her in walking. Then she began to use crutches while walking without someone's support. At the beginning of the 2nd month, she managed to walk for 10 minutes without the support of anything. As soon as she began to walk independently, Dr. Kamal decided to take his fiancée back home to Canada. He does not want to risk another single day in the Netherlands. The hospital wants to keep her for more days, but he convinced her doctor to discharge her. He is scared that in such a public hospital the Iranian immigrants or any Muslim terrorist group in Europe can easily bribe a corrupt doctor or a bad nurse and get her injected with a deadly disease or poisoned her through her medication. At the beginning of the second week of the second month from the day she was shot, the controversial female author Dr. Ibtihal has been transferred by a rented car by her Muslim apostate lover Dr. Kamal from the hospital to the Hague International Airport. On the same day, Dr. Ibtihal flew along with her fiancé going back to Canada. For weeks after their return home, a Dutch court in Hague invited the female victim of the assassination attempt to return to the Netherlands for the trial of the Iranian terrorists. Once again, her apostate lover Kamal stood firmly against her return to Europe, but the brave girl Ibtihal insisted to go back. When he could not stop her from going back to the Netherlands, Dr. Kamal decided to accompany her. The couple flew back to Hague under full secrecy. They did not want to reveal any information about their flight and the place of their stay. They did not book any hotel in advance. As soon as they reached the city, they hired a car, traveled outside of the city, found a simple motel, and booked a room. No one knew about their arrival or place of stay. Before they went to the motel, the apostate man Kamal put on artificial beard, mustache, and Islamic clothes, and the apostate girl Ibtihal donned the Islamic hijab that made them both look like a Muslim husband and his Muslim wife. The trial has been conducted in a fully secured courtroom in Hague City. There are 9 Iranian suspects involved in the assassination attempt. 6 of them are immigrants from Iran and 3 are Iranians born and brought up in the Netherlands. The exceptionally beautiful girlfriend of the assassin is the only female among the 9 suspects. The charges have been read first by the court prosecutor. The 9 suspects had already confessed their involvement in the assassination plot. The court sentenced 5 of them to life imprisonment for their previous terrorist activities and for their involvement in the plot. 3 of them have been sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment without parole. The beautiful girlfriend of the assassin is the only one who got a lighter sentence. She has been sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. The court ruled that the only person that is entitled to claim the bounty money is the female victim herself. Therefore, a couple of days after the trial, the Swiss bank transferred $50 million into the account of the most hated woman by the Muslims. The Islamic Republic of Iran considered the Dutch court and the Swiss bank to have stolen their money and therefore vowed to revenge for such unjustifiable theft. This is the second time the so-called blasphemous Sudanese apostate girl has justly taken the Muslim sums of money. The first $50 million paid to her by the Turkish government as compensation for the physical and sexual abuses she had been subjected to inside Ankara women's prison, and this second time, the $50 million of the Iranian government has been imputed to her bulging bank balance. One day, Muslims who hate her and want to kill her may make her, unintentionally, a billionaire woman. Chapter 58. The honeymoon of the newly wedded lovers. The Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal and the Sudanese apostate man Kamal got married shortly after their return from the Netherlands. Their wedding took place in full secrecy at a 5-star hotel in Toronto. All the directors of the Muslims' liberation movement and their families have been invited for such a beautiful occasion. Their wedding celebration is like one of those wonderful times in our lives that will not be repeated. On the second day, the newly wedded couple flew from Toronto to Hawaii to enjoy their honeymoon. They spent 2 weeks on those wonderful American islands. Dr. Ibtihal authored a small book about the wonderful days she spent with her bridegroom on the sandy beaches of Hawaii. She called her book, Hawaii, Islands Without the Fear of Muslim Terrorists. In the book, she described her wonderful honeymoon days on those beautiful islands with her handsome groom and apostate lover. She said she had never felt secure since the time she forsook Islam until she went to Hawaii with her bridegroom Kamal. On those islands, the lovely bride Ibtihal felt like a bird set free from its cage, and she could fly freely without the fear of being shot dead or rearrested and imprisoned in a cage called a women's prison, as happened to her in Sudan, Turkey, and Canada. The controversial female author concluded her book by saying that the world without Islam can be like a big Hawaii. She also mentioned that the world with Islam is like a large country called Somalia or Afghanistan, where every man is a dangerous armed terrorist, and every female is oppressed and abused Muslima woman who is covered by the hijab and abaya or burqa. From the most wonderful and secure place on earth, the female adventurous Ibtihal decided to travel to the most dangerous place on the globe. Somehow, the lovely bride convinced her handsome bridegroom to take her to the Holy Land. It is her heart's desire for a long time to see the place where her Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was born, taught, crucified, buried, resurrected, and ascended to heaven. She told her husband that if she will be given the choice to choose where she wishes to die, she will choose the place where Jesus offered his life for her. Unfortunately, the Israeli embassy in Ottawa refused to issue visiting visas to the lovely bride Ibtihal and her handsome bridegroom Kamal. The embassy informed them that the present situation in the Middle East is not favoring their visit. As Canadian Christian citizens, the newly married couple demanded their right to travel to the Holy Land. The Israeli embassy reluctantly agreed to issue their visas. However, the newly wedded couple has been told by the embassy that they can travel to Israel at their own risk. The Israeli ambassador knew such a controversial female author who convinced the ICC to legally condemn the sacred texts of Islam is hated by every Muslim in the world. Therefore, she can expose herself and her husband to an imminent danger of kidnap and assassination by the Muslims in the Middle East. At any rate, the two Sudanese apostates planned a secret trip to Jerusalem. They decided to disguise themselves as a Muslim couple visiting Israel. They planned to fly from Canada to Israel via India. While he was living in India, the Sudanese apostate man made a vow to the Lord that if he gives him a righteous wife, he will bring her to India for their honeymoon. Dr. Kamal spent 14 years in India before he immigrated to Canada. He spent all those years in books. He did his BA, MA, and PhD in philosophy and comparative studies of religions. During those years, he visited many cities in India. Among all the cities he visited, he loves Goa. The city of Goa does not resemble any city in India. The Western tourist visitors to that city are always more than Indian visitors. Goa has many beautiful beaches with golden sands. Dr. Kamal saw the city of Goa once during his extended stay in Hindustan. However, the effect that the beauty of that city left in his mind and heart could not be compared with his visit to the Hawaii Islands. For that reason, as the heart's desire of Ibtihal is to see the Holy Land, the heart's desire of Kamal is to take his beautiful bride to those golden beaches in Goa. The lovers knew the considerable risk involved in visiting India and Israel. Their love for those places and their trust in God could not prevent them from taking the considerable risk. Once again, the Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal disguised himself as a Muslim man with a long beard and put on those white Sudanese clothes that looked like a woman's nightgown or a pregnant woman in her 8th month. Then he covered his head with a big white turban and carried a long prayer rosary in his hand. The only thing he refused to carry with him is a copy of the recently condemned Quran. The Muslim apostate woman Dr. Ibtihal wrapped her entire body from head to toe with that coffin-like Muslim woman's abaya and concealed half of her face with a hijab. In addition, she covered her eyes with black glasses. Her bridegroom Kamal might not have recognized his beloved bride if he met her on the plane and sat near her all the way from Canada to India. Those somber Islamic attires have converted the newly married couple back to Islam and took them to the 7th century society of the so-called lighted city of Medina at the time of the alleged prophet of God Muhammad. Every Sunday there is one Air Indian flight from Toronto to New Delhi. The newly wedded couple decided to fly on that flight because they are afraid that they might be recognized if they traveled through one of the European cities. Furthermore, most of the flights from Europe to India go through Gulf countries in the Middle East. The couple cannot take such a foolish step by staying for a few hours in any city in the Arab world while they are waiting in transit for their connecting flight. All Muslim countries have what they called the Criminals Watch Treaty with Sudan. Therefore, if the controversial female author who drafted anti-Islamic books and legally condemned the Quran and Hadiths through the ICC is recognized through her name, which is a high probability, she will be immediately arrested and extradited to Sudan. Many Sudanese anti-government politicians and citizens fell into that trap and ended up in the notorious Khartoum prisons known as ghosts' houses, and later they were either tortured to death or hanged on the gallows. The newly married couple's trip from Toronto to New Delhi went quite well. No one among the passengers or the flying crew could be able to identify them. At the Indira Gandhi International Airport, the lovers have been questioned about the purpose of their visit to India. One of the airport police officers has become a bit surprised when the couple told him that they are on their way to Goa City for enjoying their honeymoon. The Hindu police officer has found it difficult to believe such a backward Muslim man would take his burqa-clad bride, who looks like a black demon or ghost, for a honeymoon to that paradise-like city full of European tourists who have girlfriends who walk on the golden beaches of Goa half naked in their sexy bikinis or sometimes topless without wearing bras. The word masla in India is a derogatory word just like the word nigger in the USA and Paki in the UK. It is used by the sworn enemies of Muslims, the Hindus, to insult the Muslims. In order to deviate his attention and remove his doubts, Dr. Kamal began to joke with the Hindu officer in the Hindi language. I will lock my bride in the hotel room and go by myself to enjoy my honeymoon with a sexy Indian goan girl or hot white European chick who walks on the beach topless, said Dr. Kamal, while laughing. Have you already decided to marry another woman besides her? Asked the officer in Hindi. I want to make them 4 wives before the end of this year. You Muslim guys are crazy people. I find it difficult to live with one woman, and you people want to marry up to 4 ladies in 1 year? The more you have the women in your possession, the more you enjoy them. This is the wise advice of our infallible Prophet Muhammad, who loved women and perfume more than anything in his life. He used to have sex with his 9 wives for 1 single hour every day. He also used to fuck his 2 slaves or jari, the Coptic Christian girl Maria and the Jewish damsel Rayhana, without marrying them. The Hindu police officer has become thunderstruck and lost his words when he heard the strange logic of the Muslim groom. Therefore, he stamped the 2 passports and waved away the backward Muslim man and his dumb and demon-like bride. While they are walking away from the counter of that Hindu police officer, the Muslim bride Ibtihal asked her Sudanese bridegroom in Arabic, "What have you said to him that turned him into a statue?" When the bridegroom Kamal repeated the conversation he has with the Indian police officer in Hindi, his lovely bride Ibtihal screamed in laughter. The newly married couple spent a very wonderful week in Goa City. Dr. Ibtihal told her husband Dr. Kamal that for sure Goa is not lesser than Hawaii in beauty. The Muslima bride did not spend her honeymoon days walking on the golden beaches of Goa in her demeaning Islamic coffin, which is called a burqa, but she put on a different sexy bikini every day. Chapter 59. A visit to the holy city in the Middle East. When Ibtihal was a young Muslim girl, her life dream was to travel along with her father, who was the imam of the mosque, to the Muslim holy cities, Mecca and Medina, in Saudi Arabia, and performs the Hajj rituals. In those days, she thought the most important trip that the devout Muslim man and Muslima woman could undertake was to visit the holy cities of Mecca and Medina and perform the 5th pillar of the pilgrimage. She was told many things about those cities. She wanted to visit the shrine where her beloved Prophet Muhammad's tomb was. She used to believe that her infallible prophet had come to complete spiritual, moral, and intellectual perfections and was sent by Allah as a mercy to mankind. She also used to believe her prophet is the master of creation. Before him, no one had ever obtained such spiritual, moral, and intellectual perfection. After her conversion from Islam to Christianity, the Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal understood that the alleged prophet of God Muhammad had come to destroy the moral teachings of Jesus Christ, which he taught in the Sermon on the Mountain and other teachings in his 4 Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. She also understood that Muhammad was inspired by Satan to destroy humanity through his mujahideen in their jihad war while they were spreading Islam all over the world by the sword. They invaded many non-Muslim countries, killed infidel men, raped their women, enslaved their girls and children, and sold them in the slave markets. The incarnated Son of God Jesus Christ is the only human being who embodied all spiritual, moral, and intellectual perfections. Muhammad gave his followers free license to invade, kill, steal, rape, and convert people to his faith by force. He gave his male followers the right to oppress and abuse their women. Morally, Muhammad was faulty in every viable way. He was a murderer, child abuser, raider, robber, false prophet, and teacher of terror. So, Dr. Ibtihal shuddered and felt disgusted when she imagined herself standing in front of the grave of such an antichrist person who is euphemistically called the infallible prophet of God. After their wonderful honeymoon in Goa, the newly wedded couple took their flight from Bombay to Nicosia in Cyprus. There is no direct flight from India to Israel. The only possibility for the couple is to travel to the Holy Land via Europe. From Nicosia, they got their connecting flight and flew to Jerusalem or Urshalem. The couple thanked God when their plane took off from Cyprus and headed toward Israel. Dr. Ibtihal was worried that in Nicosia her name might reveal her identity. She kept her Muslim name Ibtihal Taha al-Amin. In all the legal proceedings in her many court trials in Greece, Turkey, Canada, and the Netherlands, she was known by that name. Moreover, in all her controversial books, she put the female author's name as Ibtihal Taha al-Amin. She has never used another name to hide her identity. The couple landed at the Jerusalem International Airport after an exceedingly long trip from India. They are still disguising themselves as a Muslim couple. Unfortunately, that trick could not work at the Jerusalem International Airport. The International Airport Authority has already obtained information from the Israeli embassy in Canada that the Sudanese controversial female writer is coming for a short visit to the Holy Land. The airport authority got annoyed, and instead of allowing them inside the city, they placed the couple under arrest for trying to deceive the Israeli police. The media at once has been informed about the arrival and arrest of the controversial female author Dr. Ibtihal Taha al-Amin. Her arrival in Jerusalem and her arrest by the Israeli authority are breaking and shocking news for the world. Non-Muslims have become shocked by the foolish step such a smart woman as Ibtihal has taken. How could she leave the safety of Canada and go to such a terrorist-infested country like Israel, or what the Muslims call Palestine, which has the strongholds of the nastiest terrorist groups in the Middle East such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood, the Aqsa Mosque Brigades, among others? The members of the Israeli government have become outraged with the Jerusalem International Airport Police. The government knew that revealing information to the public about the presence of such a controversial female author in Israel may lead to many terrorist attacks on innocent civilians. Those members of the Knesset believe the Airport Police Authority was supposed to send out of their country such a woman who is hated by every Muslim in the world on the earliest available flight. The police authority decided to keep Dr. Ibtihal in detention and restrict her movement. The Israeli law requires that any foreign detainee must be brought to court within 48 hours after his arrest or be released. To avoid being held responsible for detaining a Canadian female citizen without charge, the police authority charged Dr. Ibtihal and her husband Dr. Kamal with trying to deceive the International Airport Authority of Jerusalem. Such charges annoyed the members of the Israeli Knesset. The government wanted to send Dr. Ibtihal and her husband out of the country as soon as possible. Detaining them under serious charges of attempting to deceive the police authority can give the Islamic terrorists more time to plan and carry out their deadly attacks on government places. The Jerusalem jails are teeming with Hamas female terrorists and other Islamic female militants. Therefore, such a provocative female author can be a prime target for the Islamic female radicals in prison. Assassinating her in an Israeli jail for the Palestinian female terrorists will be as easy as shooting a fish in a barrel. They also understood that the Islamic Republic of Iran will smuggle half of the Hezbollah Lebanese Shiite terrorists across the Israeli border. They may even send Hassan Nasrallah himself to make sure such a despicable Sudanese apostate woman should not leave alive from the Middle East as she did before when she was flown secretly out of Baghdad and sent by the infidel American Marines from Iraq to Germany. Even those fanatic Shiites may resurrect from the grave their dangerous leader Qasim Soleimani, who was an Iranian military officer who served in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and task him with the assassination of the most hated woman in the Muslim world. Anyhow, the two Sudanese detainees, the controversial female author Ibtihal and the Muslim apostate man Dr. Kamal, have been kept in private seclusion. They are treated fairly. They have not been subjected to any torture. When they have been interrogated, they spoke the truth and told the Israeli police that they disguised themselves as Muslims for their protection. The police authority has not accepted their excuses and placed them under detention waiting for trial. After 2 days, the couple stood before an Israeli court. The court adjourned the trial for a few weeks. This first appearance has been done in full secrecy and under tight security. There is a rumor which said that during this period the court contacted the Canadian embassy and consulted it regarding the Sudanese controversial female writer. The rumor further said that the Canadian embassy requested the Israeli criminal court to pass its judgment on Dr. Ibtihal and her husband Dr. Kamal and then transfer them to Canada to serve their sentences. This rumor could not be relied upon because some members of Israeli authority denied it when some foreign journalists questioned them. Some media people were able to trace the rumor to an Arab Muslim origin. The Israeli jail authority faced many difficulties in keeping the Canadian couple in separate detention. For that reason, the authority requested the Jerusalem Criminal Court to hasten the trial of the couple. Their presence inside the jail itself is a danger because there are Arab female guards. The jail authority cannot trust an Arab female guard to guard a single hour such a controversial female author, even if the female guard is a Christian girl or a Jewish woman. They knew the woman in question is accused by Iran and other Muslim countries of being used by Israel to author her provocative books and using the ICC to condemn the Islamic 2 sacred texts, the Holy Quran and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. They also knew that Arab Christians hate the Jews and their friends more than they hate the devil and his demons. Therefore, the members of the Knesset knew there is no Arab Christian or Jewish female guard who can hesitate for a second to kill the woman who is accused as an Israeli female spy or agent. Accordingly, after some intervention from the Knesset members, the Canadian couple has been transferred to a military jail. Fortunately, there is not a single Muslim female soldier in the Israeli army. Chapter 60. The Trial of the Lovers in Jerusalem City. The Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal's desire to visit Israel was fulfilled, but she could not be able to see those holy places where Jesus was born and brought up, lived, taught, crucified, buried, resurrected from the dead, and finally ascended into heaven and is sitting now at the right hand of God the Father. During her stay on the military base, she begged the Israeli authority to allow her to visit those holy places, but her request was denied. She was kept for 2 months in a solitary cell on the military base. During her detention, she was not allowed to see or talk to her husband. Even at the time of her interrogation, she was questioned alone. However, Dr. Ibtihal was not being beaten or raped as had happened to her in the Ankara jail in Turkey. She was treated justly and without favoritism by the Israeli authorities. The jail authority kept the place of her detention hidden from the media, and the date and place of her trial were not disclosed to the public. The trial took place in a private government building located in downtown Jerusalem. The day of the trial had been purposely chosen to be on a Friday at the time Muslims conducted their public prayer. Moreover, the police authority cleared the 4 roads that led to that building. The Jerusalem Police Authority did everything it could to prevent any terrorist attack on the controversial female author. The Sudanese apostate man Dr. Kamal was brought to court an hour before his wife. There were many police officers and secret police in and around the court. Dr. Ibtihal arrived after the judge, the jury, and her lawyer came. The police authority hired private cameramen to videotape the trial for future legal and public reference. The trial was truly short and quick. Dr. Ibtihal and her husband admitted their guilt. Then their lawyer tried to justify the reasons and circumstances that led his clients to pretend to be Muslims. The judge of the criminal court and his jury rejected the justification and sentenced the couple to 6 months of imprisonment. Since the condemned lovers have already spent 2 months and 10 days, their sentence has been reduced to 3 months and 20 days. The prison authority gave the couple the right to choose to spend the rest of their sentence in Israel or Canada. The condemned couple chose to be sent back to their country and spend the rest of their terms in a Canadian prison. When the world came to know about the decision of the Israeli court, there is an objection from Muslims as well as non-Muslims. The Arabs protested that the sentence is so lenient compared to the sentences of those Palestinians who were arrested for smaller crimes than those committed by the two main leaders of the anti-Islamic movement, which is euphemistically called the Muslims' Liberation Movement. On the contrary, non-Muslims believed that Dr. Ibtihal and her husband Dr. Kamal acted in good faith when they concealed their true identities and pretended to be Muslims. They did not do that in order to deceive or smuggle themselves illegally into Israel as many persecuted Sudanese Muslims do. Those illegal Sudanese aliens were treated as refugees and put in refugee camps. The two Sudanese apostates arrived at the Jerusalem International Airport with valid Canadian passports and tourist visas issued to them by the Israeli embassy in Ottawa. In fact, every year, thousands of Muslims smuggle themselves into European cities with false papers and false claims such as being persecuted in their countries for their religious conversion or political affiliation or for being gays and lesbians. When the European police authorities discover they have false papers or false claims, they do not put them in jail or bring them to trial. Furthermore, every day, hundreds of Arab Muslims and poor Africans cross the Mediterranean Sea in floated boats and end up on European shores. Many of them got drowned in the raging waves, and their bodies became food for the whales and sharks. Those who managed to survive were neither arrested nor sent back to their countries of origin. Usually, people like those who got refugee status and full support and protection in those countries sometimes might turn out to be dangerous Muslim terrorists and do great harm to the infidel citizens of the Western countries that gave them shelter and protection. Unless those resettled Muslim refugees are involved in some terrorist activities, the European authorities would treat them like any other citizens and grant them protection and support. Although the Israeli Police Authority remained alert during those 2 months, still the controversial female author Ibtihal's presence in the women's jail led to a few terrorist attacks in the eternal capital city of Israel, Jerusalem, which resulted in the death of innocent people among the civilians and a few police officers and military soldiers. Chapter 61. The Jewish-Arab conflict over the Promised Land. During her stay in the Jerusalem women's jail, Dr. Ibtihal was inspired to author a book about the Jewish-Arab conflict regarding their claims to who among them has the right over the Promised Land. While she was a Muslim girl, Dr. Ibtihal was fully convinced by her Islamic religious teachings and Arabic cultural upbringing that the Jews are a cursed people and a satanic race, and they have no right in Palestine. She viewed them as European invaders just like the British colonists. Many times, she heard in the mosque on Friday public prayer the Imam offered a loud prayer for Allah to help Muslim mujahideen defeat the Jews and Christians and make them and their wives, children, properties, wealth, and lands booty for Muslims. She also heard every Friday the Imams shouting from the pulpits, "O Allah, defeat the Jews and Christians, make their wives widows, make their children orphans, freeze their blood in their veins, dry the milk in their women's breasts, send your thunderbolts on their heads. Make them beggars and vagabonds, make them slaves to Muslims, make them the scum of the earth, make them blind and deaf," and so on and so on. After every sentence, she used to hear the Muslim congregation shouting in unison, "Amen." She learned that the Jews of Medina at the time of the Prophet Muhammad made many attempts to kill him. Once they wanted to throw a huge rock on his head and kill him while he was sitting under the wall of one of the houses of the Jews. But Allah revealed the conspiracy to the Prophet through the angel Gabriel. The second attempt was when the Jews agreed to open their garrisons for the allied tribes of the pagans of Mecca to enter Medina and slay the Prophet Muhammad and his followers. Once again, Allah sent a strong storm and chased the allied troops out of the outskirts of Medina. The third attempt occurred when a Jewish woman called Zainab bint al-Harith hid a deadly poison in the food of the Prophet while he was eating food with his companions in the house of his Jewish wife Safiya. Allah worked a great miracle that day by making the bones speak and informing the Prophet that it had been poisoned. The fourth time, when the Jews told the Prophet Muhammad there was no prophet of God who died before visiting their holy city Jerusalem. They said that because they wanted him to go to their promised land in the Levant and fall in the hands of the Romans and get killed along with his mujahideen. The Prophet believed their words and marched to the Holy Land along with 30,000 Muslim fighters. His advance was blocked by more than 200,000 Roman and Arab soldiers. Fearing for his life, the coward Muhammad canceled the invasion and fled back to Medina. To hide his cowardness, the Prophet of Islam claimed that Allah has revealed to him the Jewish conspiracy through his angel Gabriel. The Prophet Muhammad promised Muslims that before the last day of judgment they shall kill all the Jews of the world. In that he said, "The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind stones and trees. The stones and trees will say, 'O Muslims, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him.'" Only the Garkad tree, the boxthorn tree, would not do that because it is one of the trees of the Jews, reported jointly by Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Therefore, when she was a Muslim girl, Ibtihal used to hate the Jews with bitterness. In those days, her hatred toward the Jews would be impossible to put in words. As a Muslim, she inherited anti-Semitism through the blood of her father and sucked it from the breasts of her mother. It was like her father's blood that kept running in her veins and her mother's milk that shaped her flesh and bones. Suffice it to say, when she was a Muslim, Dr. Ibtihal considered the Jews as a cursed people, subhuman, satanic race, descended from apes and pigs, the worshippers of Satan and friends of the devil. After her conversion to Islam and reading the Old Testament of the Jewish scripture, Dr. Ibtihal began to reflect on those negative teachings she learned about the Jews. Instead of being a satanic race, the Jews have been transformed into Ibtihal's mind into a chosen and blessed nation. As a Christian, she knew the Bible commanded her to bless the Jews and pray for their well-being and prosperity. Regarding the claim that the land belonged to the Arab Palestinians and the Jews are just European invaders, the Sudanese girl Dr. Ibtihal used to believe sincerely in such a false claim. She was taught that the land originally was called Canaan. That land was inhabited by people known as the Canaanites and Philistines. The Arab Palestinians of today are falsely claiming and teaching their kids that they are the descendants of those ancient Canaanites and Philistines. According to her Islamic heritage, which she learned at home from her Muslim family and in school from her female teachers, the Jews had never been to that land before. After her conversion from Islam to Christianity and carefully studying the history of that land, the genius female writer Dr. Ibtihal discovered that those ancient Philistines were from Greece, specifically from the island Crete, and as such had nothing to do with the Arab Palestinians of today. They spoke a language that is extinct today, but a few words of it were preserved in Jewish, Persian, and Roman writings. Those ancient Philistines adopted Canaanite culture and language. After the Jews came from Egypt under the leadership of Moses and Joshua, they began to conquer some parts of the Canaan lands and occupy them. During the reigns of King David and Solomon, the Jews had their first kingdom, which they named the Kingdom of Israel. The Jews lived in that land for over 1,600 years, except for 70 years when they were taken into the Babylonian captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar. After their 70 years of captivity, the Jews returned to the Promised Land, rebuilt their cities and towns, and lived until the first coming of Jesus Christ. During that period, the Jewish land went under the reign of the Romans who colonized it for a long time. After the Bar Kokhba revolt of the Judeans and the subsequent Roman repression and exile, the Romans renamed the entire district of Judea, Palestina, as a mark of insult to the Jews because the ancient Philistines were the sworn enemies of the children of Israel. This is because of the Romans' knowledge of the region's history and the fact that the Philistines and the Israelites were warring peoples. This information revealed that the Romans were the first people to rename the land of Judea as Palestine. At that time, the Arabs had no significant presence in the region. The same source informed us that the Muslim conquest brought Arabs to the region in 636 AD during the Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. Therefore, it was during the second Caliph Omar that the Arabs invaded the land of Palestine. The British writers of the 19th century and exceedingly early 20th century, due to the growing anti-Semitism in Europe, began to refer to the Arabs of Palestine as Philistines. This is apparently not due to their belief in a strong connection of those Arabs with the ancient Philistines, but merely reflects the former erroneous belief that Philistines simply denotes native of Palestine. Dr. Ibtihal understood the Jewish-Arab conflict after she converted from Islam to Christianity and began to read the Jewish-Christian Holy Scriptures, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and consulted other sources. Her findings revealed that the Jews have scriptural and historical claims on the land more than the Arabs have. The so-called Palestinians today are the descendants of the Arab invaders who invaded the Promised Land through the sword in the 7th century AD, and as such, they have neither right on the Jewish land nor have any relation with the ancient Philistines, who were Europeans who immigrated from an island in Greece called Crete and occupied the land of Canaan before the Jews took it at the time of Moses and Joshua. Today, Crete is the largest and most populous of the Greek islands, the 88th largest island in the world, and the 5th largest island in the Mediterranean Sea, after Sicily, Sardinia, Cyprus, and Corsica. Crete rests approximately 160 kilometers, 99 miles, south of the Greek mainland.